Welcome to the I Am Capable podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gilbert, CEO, founder, and coach of Capable Consulting. I was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD at the age of 8, and since then, I've navigated school, work, and leadership through a lens of neurodiversity, allowing me to create a set of strategies and insights to help neurodiverse professionals thrive. Tune in each episode for real-life scenarios, tools that bridge the gap between employees and employers. If you're a company leader, fostering inclusion, or a neurodiverse professional seeking support, then you are in the right place. Through this podcast, we'll grow together and explore what it means to have work be challenging and not hard. Let's break down the stigmas, boost productivity, and celebrate the strengths that help you feel empowered to say, I am capable. Welcome back to the I Am Capable podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gilbert, CEO, founder, and coach of Capable Consulting. And today we're going to be talking about inclusive environments. If you've been listening to the show, you've watched me on social media, or been a client of mine, then you know that I think the environment is far more important than the actual job itself. You could be the kind of person who has the same job title at multiple different places, and the type of work that you do and the way you show up really has more to do with who's around you, who's supporting you, what is it like to work with the people around you. That's where you see the different outcomes. So we're going to be talking about what it's like to create that environment where everyone feels seen, supported, valued. That way you get the best version of yourself or the best version of your team versus feeling in the dark, frustrated, burnt out, and maybe can't even get out of bed because you're so exhausted by the idea of going back to this job every day. So today we're going to be bringing on Carissa, and she's going to be asking me questions about how we can make these environments way better for everybody who works there.
Thanks for having me, Alex. I think this is like a really big and important topic, so I'm excited to really dive deeper into it with you. I think there was a few words you said that are like pretty big buzzwords, right? Like inclusivity, policies, stuff like that, right? So like, how do we take these things that are usually maybe buzzwords, right? Like inclusivity, like DEI policies or DEI training, right? And take them from paper to actual real life transformation. Like, where does that begin?
Where does that begin in terms of how to make that transformation? I think really starts from the very top. How are you showing up in a way that is really going to prove like your proof of concept in terms of support? You know, I remember when in my last company, we were talking about what inclusivity looked like and how we were going to show up differently. And everyone showed up saying, these are my pronouns. It was starting from the CEO of my company sharing that and making everybody feel seen. And everybody after that not only shared their pronouns, but shared what they were wearing, what their hair color looked like for anyone who might have struggled with that too. And then it turned into providing seats in a place that was standing room only. I mean, we do this in a lot of different ways for different communities, different ways of support. So showing up when it comes to people who have learning disabilities and ADHD and how are you providing that support is making it seamless so that it's just part of what you do every day. You know, I talk about having technology be such a huge component of what you're doing, but the idea that people can show up and not have to ask for what they need and feel like everybody is getting a little taste of what support looks like is what's changing the culture. It is making it easier to have communication styles that are open and honest and not being judged for the feedback.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, when you mention technology and kind of like other things to look out for, like you personally, if you were to walk into a company that's like truly inclusive, not just on paper, but like in real life, we're seeing that they're inclusive. Like, what are the first things that you notice?
Walking into a place to know whether or not it's inclusive. Are we talking about a physical office or a virtual experience?
Okay, so let's start with physical and then talk to me about virtual too.
Okay. Physical office space. I've had this conversation so many times about how I've walked into office spaces that are completely open. I think this was something that Google decided that everyone likes open office spaces because it makes it really collaborative and everything like that. And every time I've walked into an office that looks like that, I physically want to vomit because I'm like, this is the most distracting physical space I could be in. Something that people like to do who have ADHD or learning disability is do something called body doubling, where you are sitting kind of side by side with somebody and focusing on your own work. Think of like when you go to a coffee shop or you're sitting and doing work on a plane or in the library. No one's actually like paying attention to what you're doing, but you are able to focus because everyone else is focused around you, and it kind of motivates you in that way. It's different when you are sitting there with coworkers who might stop and ask you a question, like tap on your back and say like, hey, I know you were working on this, and immediately your focus is gone. So when I see those, I'm like, this isn't working. I have also found that companies that do work really well have so many different varieties of workspaces. So you do have the collaborative, like center of the work tables. You do have quiet spaces, or maybe your lighting is slightly different in certain rooms, or you have the specific meeting rooms so that if you're on a call, you're not distracting everybody else in there. Or you have the fun spaces, the one that you have to be creative and like throw a ball around with your coworkers. One of my favorite companies that I went to had like literally toys and like swings. I mean, it was literally like an adult playground, and also part of that was like a coffee shop. I think if you're giving multiple different spaces and being able to change what you're physically doing really helps people think differently, but also focus when they can't focus in a traditional space.
And then what about the virtual space? I mean, work from home has taken a new life, right, over the past few years. So what's if a company is working mostly remote, and you were to virtually walk into that company and it's truly inclusive, what would you notice?
In terms of a virtual space, like what does it look like? I would want to know what is their dynamic, because a lot of the times when companies are fully remote, I had a client whose company was fully remote, and they had policies where they were checking the mouse to see if it was moving, to see if you were actually working within those hours. So I thought, wow, how intrusive to think that somebody who is working for you is not submitting things. I think when you are setting up something that is virtual, then the expectation is that people are working, but their adjusted hours might be slightly different. They might have already had that conversation with their manager, but if you are checking their status of whether or not their mouse is moving and kind of being like a big brother in that way, oh, red flag. No, it will not work. So I would say empowering people to know that they're going to work within hours that make sense for them.
Yeah. Totally. I've seen that too.
Someone told me they got like a mouse mover because they were the kind of person who liked to get up and take a lot of breaks, and they kept freaking out that their boss was going to be like, "Oh my God, I'm not moving." But they were like taking their calls on a walk instead of sitting at their desk, and they were just nervous that it didn't look like they were working. So, yeah. Wow. Don't do that.
Yeah. So would you consider it inclusive if people or employers were to kind of adapt to different working styles like that? Like someone might have easier focus while walking on a meeting, stuff like that.
I think we have changed so much in the last 5 years to understand what work looks like. And people are more productive, and I think big top CEOs are really struggling with the idea that people can still be very productive when they're working from home or in different environments. But there's something about getting that dopamine fix and getting fresh air and walking and doing something else. Like people have walking desks. People have different ways in which they work, and they tend to be more productive that way when they're not physically sitting at a desk from 9 to 5. So I think if you're open to that and you're excited by what people are doing to kind of get their creative juices flowing, why would we diminish that?
Okay, well, I'm excited to continue diving deep into this topic with you. Next, we're going to transition to the See It Through My Eye segment, where we directly hear from someone with lived experience. And today's question comes from Andy from Dallas. So let's go ahead and hear his question.
Hey, Alex, Andy from Dallas here. I have a question for you about communication. Throughout my career, at this point, I've realized that I've had communication issues. And more on the lines of supervisors and managers really not communicating well enough for me. Specifically, I've been in plenty of situations with old supervisors where I brought an idea to them, or they gave me a simple task to complete, and I ended up coming up with 100 questions on that simple task, and then getting looks like, "Why are you asking me this? I asked you to do this one little thing." And I found out I'm a little bit more forward thinking than a lot of supervisors or managers, or the majority of them that I've had in the past. And that didn't feel really good to have to go through that, to bring up, self-doubts that really shouldn't have been there. What do you suggest for somebody going through that same situation where they're taking good ideas, good content, and maybe the content isn't good, but taking something that you believe in or something that you want to ask somebody, how do you shake that fear of bringing that stuff up if you've already kind of been beaten down, or if you're just feeling dumb, or a lack of confidence in taking topics to anyone, specifically supervisors in my situation? What do you suggest for people to have a plan of attack, to take an idea, a thought, a concern, no matter what it is, to somebody when you're already feeling a little insignificant or under the radar?
That's a really good question. And my first response to that, I think of psychological safety, because there is so much that people with ADHD and learning disabilities come into those conversations exactly as you're saying. They feel insignificant, or they might be beaten down for feedback, or not really gotten the response, or maybe it feels like that and maybe that's not actually what's happening, but the scar tissue is there. And when you have constantly been in those scenarios, you're far less likely to keep going forward and asking questions, to keep going forward and bringing something up that you see, because you don't feel safe saying anything. That is never a place where you're going to get the best version of any employee or employer. And so I think one of the things that I would say of going into those conversations when you feel kind of distraught is really working out, what is it that you actually want to share, and where are the questions that are really more urgent to ask versus ones that would be nice to know that if you were continuing to have this conversation that you could eventually get the answers to. And I think a lot of the times people with ADHD and learning disabilities really struggle with, this is the part that somebody actually needs to know, because to us, everything has the same urgency. Everything feels important. Everything feels relevant, and we kind of overshare anything that we are thinking about. And we tend to overwhelm the person that we're talking to. So I would say, what steps can you take to really ask yourself these questions? And this is where, whether you were, let's say, working with me in particular, in terms of talking this conversation out, people with ADHD or learning disabilities really do like to talk out a lot of their challenges and really get clarity on their questions. So can you talk it out with a coach to really figure out, what is it that I need to ask? Can you use different AI tools? Google Gemini Live has a conversational tool that you can constantly go back and feedback and say, here, I'm trying to figure out what my top priorities are, maybe get clarity. And that way, so you, when you are sitting down to a conversation, you have maybe 3 or 4 things that you're talking about that are relevant to that particular conversation, as opposed to everything all at once. I think we need to go into conversations with a very clear, distinguished set of questions that are going to be answered, and get clarity later on other things. And it's hard to do that when everything feels relevant and important.
I'm sure if Andy or people in similar situations to him could rewind time, they might have wished they could see some red flags that a situation like that would happen, right? That they would be made to feel less than, or quote unquote stupid, right? What are some red flags that people can look out for in a work environment, that to kind of know and see that ahead of time, that, okay, these people might not validate my concerns, or they might not hear out my ideas?
I think those are really good questions, Carissa, and I'm really glad you asked it that way, because I think I've talked to people about the red flags and the green flags when it comes to finding the right environment, especially in a job interview. And I think that you tend to know those things as you're interviewing and you become more aware of what those red flags might be. I will also say sometimes you are already in a job and now you have a new manager or a new person who's come into play in terms of your role. And so those are things that you can't necessarily anticipate changing. But let's start with you're going through the process of interviewing first and ask, what would those red flags be? I actually just coached one of my clients on an interview. He just got a job offer. I'm very, very excited for him. But he was going through interviews with a few different companies. And one of the people he was interviewing with, he said something about, why would you think I wouldn't onboard you? You think I'm really going to bring you on and not train you? That was his response to asking about different onboarding experiences. It was so casual and dismissive, and the language was so demoralizing and demeaning that he sat back and was like, I immediately did not want that job because that would be my boss. And if that was the approach to every question that I asked, it was like, who is this helping? And I honestly would ask that same employer, who is that helping? How does any type of response to that question make anyone feel prepared to do that job? So I would say, what are questions that you can ask to know if it's the right environment for you that kind of tip you off to say, this is going to work for me or this is not? You know, in the last episode, I was talking about how I had 2 different job titles at 2 different locations, one of which that I quit the week of my wedding and the one that I ended up at. When I asked about the different job environment and spaces of how I could work, the response was immediately different. If you feel comfortable, even on the interview process, having open dialogue, it's likely going to have some green flags versus those red flags. Now, if we're talking about somebody who's already in a position and now you have a new boss or a new way of going about this, or maybe you got promoted and now you're working with somebody else, that's where it gets a little tricky because you've had an established practice really in terms of what you're doing and what works for you. I would say in that sense, one of the red flags of the new person that you are working with is what is immediately making you feel uncomfortable in terms of how you've gone about things. What are some things that you can think about in terms of what worked for you in the past with previous managers that you'd like to continue, and what are the things you'd like to leave behind? Because everyone has a different work style. Everyone has different forms of communication. And the idea is that we want to collaboratively work together to move the needle forward. But you have to know what works for you and what doesn't, so you can figure out what those red flags or green flags are for you.
So, Alex, if we're taking this same topic and we're flipping the lens and we're looking at things from a leadership perspective, to some people, like building systems and policies or just being inclusive in general might seem like extra work or quote unquote inconvenient, right? What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's truly inconvenient?
I think that's such a misconception in terms of making inclusivity something that's quote unquote inconvenient, because everything I've ever talked about on this podcast or what I've talked about on social media or in my client conversations every day, everything that I'm talking about applies to everybody, because that is what inclusion looks like. It is support that you are giving as a full picture. And I think that when we are training people to understand that everyone has different layers of communication, different styles, different needs, regardless of what their disability status is, you're changing how you're approaching every challenge. There is not going to be the perfect synchronicity every single project team member. You might move forward. You might be able to do things really well, and some things are going to be better than others, but you want to be able to bring people in. And if you are starting with onboarding conversations, or you are going with ongoing training for your employees and your employers about what communication styles look like, what tools are available, what can be provided in terms of support, it really changes how you approach a lot of this. And I think that if you are noticing that you have an employee that is struggling with a certain task over and over again, there are likely within your company support systems and layers that can give them tools that they might not know exist. I remember in my last job before COVID, I was moved into a new position that wasn't necessarily fully in the scope of things that I was like naturally good at that really fit my strengths. There were a lot of it, but there were definitely some pieces that I was struggling with. And I remember having this conversation with my boss saying like, I keep getting stuck on these 6 things and you keep asking for this every week. I know you want this. I know this is something that's important to you, but I'm really having a hard time. And part of that open discussion was, one, having her sit with me during our weekly meetings to go over that part so that it was easier for me kind of breaking down those tasks, but also the fact that there was coaching available at the type of role that I was in, at the type of level that I was at. And a lot of companies have those support systems in place so that you can get the extra needed support. I kind of thought of it as I was thinking through my time in school, thinking back to having something called Resource Room. And Resource Room, if you're unfamiliar with the educational space, is this classroom of up to 5 kids with one teacher who's a special ed teacher who really helps you work through your different challenges. And my friends growing up were the smartest kids you will ever meet. They are brilliant doctors, lawyers, speech pathologists, all have multiple degrees. And I would constantly tell them, oh, I just did that in Resource Room. I did that in Resource Room. And they would look at me and they're like, I could use that. Why are you getting that? I was like, well, do you want to spell everything wrong all the time? Or do you want to like have a hard time focusing? And they weren't actually saying they'd rather have a disability, but they were like, that's really nice to have in the middle of the day to kind of just regroup and refocus and get that support. A lot of companies have those tools in place. They have outreach of companies and consultants that they are looking to coach you through. So what resources already exist within your space that you can help your employees with if it's not something you can do directly?
To me, one of my favorite pictures that you paint is when you build a ramp outside of a building.
Oh, yeah. I do say this. I do say this a lot, that when you're talking about company policies, that think of it as a ramp to your front door, that the ramp is accessible to the able-bodied person, to the person in a walker or a wheelchair, or a parent in a stroller. Everybody is walking through the door. Everyone is able to go through the door and get the same experience because you have made that entrance available to everybody. And that's really what we're talking about, is giving that support system that everyone can lean in when they need it, because you might need it for tasks that are completely unrelated to the thing that you do every day because it's not your skill set, or maybe something just got dumped on your plate. And you could be neurotypical and think, can I use that? Absolutely, because that's the whole point, is that it is available for everybody.
And that is what is called Bridging the Gap, which brings us straight into our next segment.
Isn't that so convenient? Isn't that so convenient? It's almost like we planned for that to be the case. Yes, we do want to bridge the gap.
Yes. Okay, Alex. So let's bridge the gap. We heard about inclusion from the employee side. We heard from the employer leadership side. So now the challenge comes into bringing everything all together. What are some practical ways that leaders and employers can meet in the middle so that inclusion feels like a shared effort?
I think one of the most obvious right now that's coming to me is having ERGs, or employer resource groups, because I think every company is different. Every environment is different. And this is why I also talk about the concept of best principles versus best practices, because best practices assumes everyone could do the exact same thing and end up with the same results, which is BS. There is not a single company or a single person that I've ever coached or supported in this that has had the exact same experience. So why would we approach anything the same way and think that it's going to change exactly what you need? So best principles assumes everyone is on the same page. We are all looking to make this space better, but we're going to do it in our own way with the same goals in mind. So that is the best principles versus best practices. So when it comes to ERGs, that group of people on the ground in your company is going to know what culturally fits best. What are the things that are working? What's not? What are the feedback loops that are happening or maybe not? What are the policies in which you are running your meeting settings that might need some improvement. Those are the things that you're only going to know on the ground. And that's where a lot of the times I am hearing responses back from ERGs in particular when they are reaching out to me to do some programming, because they recognize these are the gaps that are missing. And where can they fill in the gaps? What are things that we can do as consultants to be able to have conversations with their teams, with their staffs, to really bridge that gap and give the support that's needed? And I will tell you, of every company that I've worked with, as I said, has needed something different. But from the beginning, the layer of understanding of what neurodiversity looks like in adults and how it impacts people at work is really the overarching thing that has always come up in every company. Is we need to have a baseline of understanding that is at least similar enough so that we have open communication that feels approachable and accessible.
And for employees who maybe are not comfortable like being an advocate or comfortable having really in-depth conversations, like what's a low risk way for them to start this dialogue in the workplace?
So many people feel that way because they don't want to out themselves to say that I have a disability. And that's what's really nice about having some of those ERGs, is because it's not just people who fit in the category, for example, of being neurodivergent, but they're also allies. If those groups don't exist already within your company structure and the idea of advocacy is really uncomfortable for you, totally understand. I would start with what's already in your employee handbook. What is already available to you that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But that's also why I'm bringing this conversation up, is because if we are talking about it from solely leaning on the employee to develop this, to advocate for themselves and work this hard to feel comfortable in your space, then it's a bigger issue within your space. That there is a bigger policy change that needs to take place in terms of how you're approaching your hiring, how you're doing your onboarding, how you're training your managers. And that is what I'm trying to talk about within this space, because I really want you to feel like the environment is supportive of that the person doesn't feel like if they are the one advocating that they have to work so hard to do that.
And where do you think the payoff in all of this comes?
People are so productive when they feel supported and valued and seen. And I've mentioned this before in other podcasts. You know, I worked on creating a mentor retention program for students with disabilities at Indiana. And I had done so much research in the process of that. And what I had learned is that people who understood how to advocate for themselves were the ones who found the resources. And the resources that were available and were used were the ones that were able to be successful. So if you are a company who has resources available and you have employees who are interested in participating and using the resources that are available, they are going to be successful. And the thing is, when you have a culture of people who feel successful, who feel supported, who are less burnt out, who feel seen, are maybe being promoted or being heard, that changes how everybody is approaching their work. That changes how everybody is showing up every day. And those are the employees that are going to stay. And that's what you want, because investing in your employees that are already there is a better business strategy than looking for new ones who might leave in a year because you didn't create the environment that was willing to help them survive and thrive.
Well, thank you, Alex, for having this discussion and for involving me in it today. It's, not an easy discussion to have, but I really love hearing all of the advice that you have to offer.
I talk about this.
Lighten things.
Yeah, no. I was just going to say, I talk about this all the time about how I want things to be challenging and not hard. And we were even talking about this conversation. I was like, this is a really big challenge for me because I want to be able to make this easier for other people. But I'm like, how do I approach this in different ways? So I'm glad we were able to do that. Yeah.
So now to end things off with some lighter questions, I should say.
Yeah, let's do it.
Some rapid fire questions. If you could have dinner with any famous person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Dinner with any person? Jennifer Aniston. I
Okay.
love her. Also, if you didn't know this, she's dyslexic and I believe also has ADHD. And she's brilliant and has done so many things. I just feel like I would love to have a conversation with her and just laugh.
I love it. And talk about friends.
I mean, that goes without saying, but
Yeah.
yes, I would definitely do that.
Next question. I don't know if you've heard of this hot topic. 1 gorilla versus 100 men. Who do you think is winning?
I would say gorilla. Never underestimate ones you can't figure out because they've probably outsmarted you in ways that you don't even see or think or hear. So I'm going gorilla.
All right. It's been a pretty hot debate. Okay, the last one I'm super interested in. When you were like a kid, did you have like a childhood celebrity crush?
Did I? Oh my God. What decade?
I know. Okay, well, let's say like teen.
Teen? Oh, teen. I'll go like preteen. If I was going to go like Backstreet Boys, I really liked Brian Luttrell. If it was in Sync, I liked JC Chasez. I would say those were like probably up there. I would probably say that. And then also Ryan Gosling if you want like later teens to after The Notebook. So
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you know, you know.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Carissa. And thank you for listening. If you're a neurodiverse adult navigating challenges in your career or a company looking to become more inclusive, then visit us at capableconsulting.com. If you have questions or you'd like to submit for a future episode, email us at podcast@capableconsulting.com. Follow us on social at I Am Capable. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite shows. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching and listening to the I Am Capable podcast. My mission is to make sure that with the right strategies, neurodiverse employees and their companies are able to increase productivity, improve communication, and create an environment where everyone feels valued. Through one-on-one coaching, I help neurodiverse professionals gain clarity, build confidence, and develop personalized tools to succeed at work. For companies, Capable Consulting offers custom workshops and trainings designed to help your teams better understand and support a dynamic, neurodiverse workforce. Whether you are navigating career shifts, college transitions, or you are looking for community through the ADHD Lounge, I'm here to help. Let's build a workplace where everyone can thrive. Visit capableconsulting.com to learn more and connect with me today.